here. Thank you. And here we go. Spyros Orfanos. Welcome.
Hello, thank you. I'm very pleased to be here. I'm very pleased to be invited by Elizabeth. I founded the Immigration and Human Rights Work Group. Closer? Closer. Oh my God. Okay. Thank you. I'm very grateful to Elizabeth for inviting me. I'm a resident of Montclair, so this is my congressional district too. So it's what is happening here is extremely important to me. And I'm just going to say a few things as a psychologist, and especially as a child psychologist. I know a great deal about some of the issues that are being confronted at the border with the separation of families. I also train PhDs and MDs in advanced clinical skills, and I trained them in 26 different kinds of trauma, being able to identify 26 different kinds of trauma. And for children, the only worse trauma than being separated from parents is torture, sexual abuse, and physical abuse. So separation from parents comes very, very close to the top of the great traumas that can be inflicted on children. And another way of putting it is that it's abuse. It's not trauma, it's abuse. Now, we have scientific reasons to know how devastating such trauma is. We've known this since the 1940s. But the truth is, we also know from history, how devastating trauma is, particularly separation of families. We know this from the slave auctions in early America. We know this from the assimilation of the Native Americans. We know this from the Holocaust, and we know this from the Argentinian and Khmer Rouge losses that took place with children and the dictatorships that were going on back there. So there's a long history of separating families. The one thing that we're absolutely clear on, whether it's historical research or scientific research, is that it is devastating. It is devastating on the children, whether the children are 4 months old or whether the children are 16 years old. It is absolutely a devastating, traumatic experience because it not only has an effect in the moment of separation, but it also has ongoing long-term effects. And the effects are on not just the mental health of children, but even the physical health on children. So we have tremendous documentation for this. Now, I know there have been a number of numbers that have been thrown out by the government, and it's changing all the time. But as far as I'm concerned, even if it was just one child that was being separated from parents, that would be cruel and unusual punishment. And the children are being used, and the funny thing is that the government is telling us very clearly that the children are being used. I mean, that's also remarkable. I mean, they don't even know how to lie properly. They don't know how to do it. They're very good at telling us the truth. And besides that, there's also tremendous chaos. So we have a situation in which children, before they got to the Mexican-U.S. border, probably had a horrible ordeal, and that was traumatic enough as it was, wherever they were coming from in Latin America. They're with their parents, most of them, so that's somehow reassuring. So that traumatic journey gets met at the border by further trauma. So we have more trauma on top of trauma. And when it comes to these kinds of separations, 1 + 1 + 1 doesn't equal 3. It winds up equaling 10. And the kinds of conditions, depending on the child's age, depending on the length of detention, the effects on the mental health of children, the anxieties, the depression, the post-traumatic stress disorders are just absolutely remarkable. But there are long-term effects. A lot of the effects are hidden. People often say, oh, the girl was only 1 year old when this was happening. She doesn't remember anything. That's not accurate. The fact is that the body remembers everything. and it shows up much later with cardiac conditions, a whole range of inflammatory autoimmune illnesses. So the consequences are really quite remarkable, and we've got scientific evidence for it. So what is going on right now is really absolutely, it's just cruel punishment. It's cruel what we're doing to children. And it doesn't take a psychologist or a child psychologist. We've all seen the photographs. We know that these children are frightened. We see it in their eyes. We see them crying, and it is right there in front of us. What we don't know is the exact numbers. That will probably come out in time. The government is also very good at fragmenting and setting these children away. And by the way, it's not just the children that are suffering. Think most of you here are probably parents. So can you imagine if your child was separated from you and you didn't know where your child was, what kind of effect that would have on your mental health and on your physical health? So we have here what would easily be called a disaster, a public mental health and physical health disaster. And it is the laws, the international laws and the domestic laws about human rights and the violation of such human rights are very clear. You don't have to be a human rights lawyer. You don't have to be an activist. It is crystal clear what is going on. And that's why we need to be telling the politicians and telling the government officials, not so fast. They can't do that. They must keep families together. That's crucial, that's important, and that's an American value, keeping families together. Thank you very much.